Spring of this year, a conference room in a regional office of the United States Department of Labor. A long table. On the table, two things. A spiral steno pad, the cheap kind with the wire coil bent from being shoved in and out of a bag, and a printed directory, 47 pages, a list of in-network mental health providers, with half the names crossed out in red pen. In the next room, an official from the Employee Benefits Security Administration reads a number to a row of people taking notes. $33,600,000. A resolution under the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. 41,000 denied behavioral health claims to be reprocessed. The plan ordered to rebuild its network and raise its therapist reimbursement rates to the level it pays for ordinary medicine. The administrator that ran the plan signed the corrective action and a 3-year monitorship. The vice president of benefits kept his job and apologized to no one. The man who signed the network adequacy attestations resigned, and he did not go to prison, because in this kind of case, there is no prison. The network had 14,000 names. I called 300 of them. 213 of those numbers did not answer, and 12 of the people were dead. I did not get a single dollar. There is no reward in this law for the person who reports it. I never expected one. I spent 9 years on a phone at an adolescent psychiatry intake desk in Cleveland, trying to find a bed for somebody else's child. Then I spent 8 years inside the plan that was supposed to make those calls unnecessary. I did not wait years with the proof in a steno pad on my kitchen table. People were being turned away right then, so I filed it while I still worked there and while it was still happening. My name is Renata Osterveld Marchetti. I am a social worker who learned how to read an insurance plan. And here's the thing I understood that year. A network you cannot reach is not a network. It is a list. Let me tell you how the list became a network again. Let me take you back to before any of it. Cleveland, the autumn of 2002. I was 25 years old. I had a brand new Master of Social Work from Case Western and a license that was still ink wet, and my first real job was at the Adolescent Psychiatry Intake Unit of a hospital on the East Side. The unit was a row of desks under fluorescent light, a wall of binders, and a corded phone at each station. The phone was the job. When a teenager came through the emergency department in a crisis, or a family doctor called because a 14-year-old had stopped eating, or a school counselor called because a kid had written something frightening, the question landed on my desk. Where does this child go next? A bed if it was bad enough, an outpatient therapist if we could send them home, a psychiatrist who could actually see them inside 2 weeks instead of 3 months. So I made calls. I had the insurance plan in front of me, whatever plan the family carried, and I had the list of in-network providers that came with it. The list was always long. It was always reassuring, and then I would dial it. Half of them did not answer. A number would ring out into nothing. A receptionist would say the doctor had retired in the spring. A line would be disconnected. A practice would say they had not taken a new patient under that plan in 2 years. I would put a small mark next to each name and dial the next one. I learned, on that corded phone, in my first months in the field, the thing that took me the next 20 years to be able to say in a sentence. The list of providers and the providers you can actually reach are 2 different lists, and the gap between them is where the children fall. I said it to a colleague once, late on a bad night, after I had called 19 names to find 1 child a bed. I said, "A network you cannot reach is not a network. It is a list." I did not know I was saying a thing I would still be saying when I was 49. I thought I was just complaining about a phone. I should tell you where I came from, because it matters to why I stayed on that phone for 9 years instead of 1. I was born in Lorain, Ohio in 1977, a steel and shipping town on the lake that had already started to come apart by the time I was old enough to notice. My father is Salvatore Marchetti. Everyone calls him Sal. He is Italian-American, West Side Cleveland stock, and he spent 40 years as a sheet metal and heating man, the kind who came home with his forearms gray and is hearing a little worse every year. He is 77 now and still alive and still in Lorain, and he still answers the phone like he is annoyed you made it ring. My mother is Guadalupe. Everyone calls her Lupe. She is Mexican-American, and she spent 33 years as a bilingual aide in the Lorraine City schools, sitting beside the kids who could not yet follow the teacher in English. She is 75 and alive, and she still corrects my Spanish and my posture in the same breath. I was the first in the family to finish college. Bowling Green for the bachelor's in social work, Case Western for the master's. My parents did not entirely understand the job. My father once asked me what I built. I told him I did not build anything. I found places for children to go. He thought about that for a while and said, "So you are a dispatcher, but for kids?" I said, "Close enough, Dad, close enough." My mother understood it faster than he did, because she had spent 33 years sitting next to the kid in the room who could not follow what everyone else could follow, the one the system was quietly built to lose track of. She used to say, in Spanish, that the most important person in any school is the one who notices the child nobody is calling on. I did not realize until much later that she had described my whole career before I had it. The child nobody is calling on, the family nobody is calling back. Same job, different room. I want to be honest about the household I grew up in, because people assume things. We were Mexican on one side and Italian on the other, two cultures that the outside world thinks are loud and full of church, and ours was neither. My father is not a church-going man. My mother kept the food and the language and the holidays and let the rest go quiet a long time ago. There was no parish at the center of our house. There was a kitchen table, a furnace my father refused to pay anyone else to fix, and a rule that you did not lie about money or about work because both of them were too hard-won to insult with a lie. That was the moral spine of the place. Not a sermon, a scale. You weigh the thing honestly, and you say the true number. I did not get my values from a pulpit. I got them from two working people who had been undercounted their whole lives and refused to do it to anyone else. Now go forward. 2011. I am 34. I have been on that intake phone for 9 years, and I am tired in a way that is hard to explain to people who have not done it. Not tired of the children, tired of the list, tired of being the last competent adult between a kid in crisis and a phone that would not answer. And I made a decision that I believed was the smart one, the grown-up one, the one that would let me fix the thing instead of just absorbing it. I went to work for the insurance side, the payer side. I told myself I was going behind the curtain. If the problem was that the networks were a fiction, then the place to fix it was inside the company that built the network, not at the desk that suffered it. I got my Certified Employee Benefit Specialist credential in 2014. I learned the language of plan design and federal benefits law the way I had once learned the phone. And in 2018, I took the job that this whole story turns on: Behavioral Health Benefits Manager at Meridian Crestline Logistics. Promoted in 2021 to Director of Behavioral Health Benefits and Parity Compliance. I have a family by then, the family I still have. My wife, Adrienne. Everyone calls her Adie. She teaches high school chemistry in a Columbus suburb, and she has the particular patience of a person who spends her days explaining to teenagers why the experiment did not work. We married in 2015, in Ohio, the year we could. We have a son, Theo, who is 17 now, 80s by an earlier part of her life, and mine by adoption since 2017, and a daughter, Julia, who is 13 and who argues like a litigator. We live in a low brick ranch house from 1962 in Westerville, north of Columbus, with a kitchen table that is about to become the most important piece of furniture in this story. I took the payer side job to stop making those calls. It turned out I had gone to work for the list. Let me explain what Meridian Crestline is and what I actually did there, because the whole thing rests on a structure that most people never have a reason to look at. Meridian Crestline Logistics is a freight and warehousing company. Trucks, distribution centers, the kind of unglamorous business that moves the boxes that show up on your porch. Around 90,000 people are covered under its health plan, employees and their families, spread across 38 states. Here is the part that matters. Meridian Crestline does not buy insurance the way a person buys insurance. It is what is called self-insured. The company itself pays the medical claims out of its own money. It just hires an outside administrator to run the machinery, to build the provider network, to process the claims, to send out the denials and the approvals. That administrator was a national company called Anthelion Health Administrators out of Hartford. So, picture it. Meridian Crestline owns the risk and the money. Anthelion owns the network and the buttons. And sitting between them, supposed to make sure the plan kept its promises, was a small compliance function. By 2021, that function was me. When I arrived, the headline number was beautiful. The plan advertised a robust behavioral health network. Around 14,200 in-network mental health and substance use providers, psychiatrists, therapists, counselors, addiction treatment programs, 14,000. I remember being almost happy about it my first year. I had come from the side where you begged a list for one name that would answer. Now I was on the side that owned the list, and the list was enormous. I thought, this is the fixed version. This is what it looks like when it works. I need to teach you one law because everything turns on it, and almost nobody outside the benefits world has heard of it. It is called the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. People in the field just say parity. The idea is simple, and it is decent. A health plan is not allowed to cover mental health and addiction care worse than it covers a broken leg. If you would pay for the surgery, you have to pay for the therapy on comparable terms. You cannot put harder rules on the brain than you put on the bones. The law does not only look at the obvious things, the copays and the visit limits, the numbers you can see. It also looks at what are called the non-quantitative treatment limitations. That is a clumsy phrase, so let me make it plain. These are the rules that do not show up as a dollar amount, but that still decide whether you get care. Things like how you build the provider network, how much you pay the providers, how many hoops you make a patient jump through before you will approve treatment. The law says you cannot apply those rules more harshly to mental health than you do to regular medicine. And after a change in the law at the end of 2020, every plan had to be able to prove it, in writing, in a real document called a comparative analysis. Not a slogan, an analysis. Show your work, side by side, medicine against mental health, and demonstrate the rules are applied no more strictly to the one than the other. That was my job. I was the person who was supposed to make sure Meridian Crestline could honestly say, yes, our plan obeys this law. For my first couple of years, I thought it did. The network was huge on paper. The comparative analysis was on file. I signed what I was asked to sign. And then, in the first months of 2024, the complaints started reaching me. Not many at first. A few members, through the appeals channel, saying the same impossible thing. I have a card in my pocket from this plan. I have a list of in-network therapists. I have called 11 of them, and I cannot get my daughter in to see a single one. One member wrote a sentence I could not get out of my head. He wrote, "Your network is a phone book of people who will not pick up." A phone book of people who will not pick up. I had spent 9 years of my life dialing exactly that phone book from the other side of the desk. I knew that sentence in my bones. And now it was landing on my desk again, inside the plan I was paid to certify as adequate. Something in me that had been quiet since Cleveland sat straight up. So I started to dig. Quietly at first. I am a compliance director, not a detective, and I had no instruction to go looking. But I had a credential, I had access to the claims data, and I had a memory of a corded phone. I pulled the network file. I looked at the date it had last been substantively validated, the last time anyone had actually checked whether the 14,000 names were real, reachable, accepting patients. The date was 2021. 3 years. The list had not been truly checked in 3 years, and in mental health, 3 years is a geological age. Doctors retire, practices close, people die, numbers change. A directory you stop checking is a directory you stop owning. It curdles, name by name, while the cover page keeps promising 14,000. What you have after 3 years of not looking is not a network. It is a souvenir of one. I did not yet know how bad it was. I only knew the list was old, the complaints were real, and the law I was paid to enforce was starting to feel like a thing the plan said rather than a thing the plan did. I want to go back to those 9 years on the intake phone because they are the engine of everything I did next, and if you do not understand them, you will not understand why I could not let this go. When you spend 9 years finding placements for other people's children, you stop being able to read a provider directory as a marketing document. You read it as a set of doors. Each name is a door, and behind the door is either a person who will help a child or an empty room. The directory does not tell you which, only the phone tells you which. And I had learned, name by name, year by year, that most of the doors were painted on the wall. There was a girl when I was about 28, 15 years old, brought into the emergency department after she hurt herself, stabilized, and ready to be discharged to outpatient care if, and only if, I could find her a psychiatrist who would see her within 2 weeks. Her family had decent insurance. I had the list. I called for 2 days. 22 names. The answers I wrote in my little book were the answers I would write again 20 years later inside Meridian Crestline. Retired. Moved. Not taking new patients. Number disconnected. Wrong specialty. On the 23rd call, I found a doctor who could see her in 9 days, and I hung up the phone and I put my head down on the desk for a minute, and a nurse asked me if I was all right, and I said yes, I just found a door that opened. That is what a list does to a person who has to walk through it on behalf of a child. You never stop hearing the phone ring out. I left that desk in 2011 precisely so I would not have to hear it anymore. I told myself I was going to the place where the lists got made so I could make them true. I believed that. I want you to know I believed it. And here is the cruelty of where I ended up. I went behind the curtain to stop the calls, and I found out the company I now worked for was running the same broken phone book I had spent 9 years dialing, except now it had my name on the compliance file. I had not escaped the list. I had been promoted to certifying it. I tried to keep my normal life around it, the way you do. 80 would come home from a day of explaining chemistry to 16-year-olds, and we would have dinner at the kitchen table. Theo half listening with one earbud in, Julia narrating her grievances against the entire 7th grade. And I would be somewhere else. 80 noticed, the way she notices everything. She would say, "You are on the phone in your head again." And she was right. I would be back at that intake desk, dialing the doors, except now the doors were Meridian Crestline's doors, and the children were 90,000 people's children. My father called on Sunday evenings from Lorraine, the way he has for 30 years. Gruff, brief, mostly to make sure no one had died and the furnace was working. He asked me once what was eating me. I tried to explain the network, the parity law, the directory that had not been checked since 2021. He listened, and then he said the thing he says about everything. He said, "So the list is no good, and they know it, and they are not fixing it." I said, "Basically, yes." He said, "Then it is not a list problem, it is a people problem. Find the people." I told him I loved him and hung up. He was completely right, of course. He usually is, in his terrible economical way. By the middle of 2024, I had stopped sleeping properly. Not from the work, from the recognition. I had spent my whole adult life on one sentence. The sentence about lists and networks I had said to a tired colleague at 25. And it had followed me from a corded phone in Cleveland to a director's office in Columbus. And it was still true. And now it was mine to do something about instead of just say. I did not know yet that I would one day say it across a conference table to a vice president who would have no answer. I only knew the phone was still ringing out, and this time I was the one being paid to certify that it was not. In the summer of 2024, I did the thing that this whole story is really about. I tested the list. Not on paper, with a phone. It is called a secret shopper audit, and it is exactly what it sounds like. You take the provider directory, and instead of trusting it, you call it, the way an ordinary member would, and you write down what actually happens. The regulators do it, researchers do it. The findings are grim and well documented, and nobody who runs a network likes to see them, because the directory is the product, and the audit reveals that the product is mostly air. I did not have a budget. I did not have authorization. What I had was a printed copy of our own behavioral health directory, 47 pages, and a method, and my evenings. So I sat at the kitchen table in Westerville, after dinner, after the kids went up, with the directory and a spiral steno pad and a cheap headset, and I called the network. Not all 14,000. You do not have to. You take a random sample, enough to be statistically real, and 300 is plenty. I numbered 300 providers off the list at random, and I dialed them as a parent would, asking the questions a parent would ask. Do you take this plan? Are you accepting new patients? How soon could my teenager be seen? And I coded every single call. I made 6 categories in the steno pad: reachable and available, not accepting new patients, wrong number or disconnected, moved out of state, retired, and the one I did not want to need and needed anyway, deceased. It took me most of the summer. 80 would come into the kitchen at 10 at night and find me with the headset on and the red pen in my hand, crossing out another name. She started bringing me tea without being asked. She did not tell me to stop. She is a science teacher. She understood, better than anyone, that I was running an experiment and that the experiment was not finished until the last call was logged. I want to give you the numbers because the numbers are the whole case. Of the 300 in-network behavioral providers I called, 213 could not be reached at all. Disconnected, wrong number, no answer after repeated tries. Of those, 12 people, were confirmed deceased. I do not say that for effect. I say it because it is true and because it should make you angry. 12 human beings who had died were still listed as available in-network mental health providers in a directory the plan was handing to 90,000 people as proof that care was available. Beyond the unreachable, a large block were alive and findable, but not accepting new patients under the plan, or had moved out of state. When I finished, the share of the directory that was actually reachable and actually able to take a new patient was 29%. 71% was a ghost. And I did the control. This is the part that turns a sad fact into a violation of federal law. I ran the same secret shopper test against the plan's regular medical network, the surgeons and the internists and the orthopedists, a comparable sample. The unreachable rate there was 6%. 6. The same company, the same plan, the same administrator. When you called for a knee, 94 times out of 100, you reached a real, reachable doctor. When you called for a child's mind, you reached air 71 times out of 100. That gap, that exact gap, is what the Parity law exists to forbid. The rules were being applied far more harshly to the brain than to the bones. The 47-page directory, by the end of the summer, was an object. Half the names crossed out in red. The steno pad was full, page after page of tallies in my own handwriting. The recordings were saved, and all of it sat, in plain view, on the kitchen table in Westerville, next to the fruit bowl and Julia's homework. I want to be precise about that because it is the part of me people find strangest. I did not hide it. I did not lock it in a safe or bury it in a basement. It sat on the dinner table where my family ate because I was not building a secret weapon to detonate in 10 years. I was running an active investigation in real time while the harm was happening, and I needed it where I could keep working on it every night. The evidence lived where we lived. That was the point. Now, let me explain why the network was a ghost, because 71% of providers being unreachable is not an accident, and it is not bad luck. It is a design. Once I understood the design, I could not unsee it, and once you understand it, you will not be able to either. There are 3 machines that build a ghost network, and our plan was running all 3. The first machine is the directory itself. As I told you, it had not been substantively validated since 2021. The administrator, Anthelion, was supposed to keep it current, to verify that the people on it were alive, practicing, in state, and accepting patients. They did not, in any real way, do that. They padded the count. A provider who had signed a contract once, years ago, stayed on the list whether or not they were still seeing a soul. The directory was optimized to be large, not to be true, because the size of the network was the thing the plan advertised, and the truth of the network was the thing nobody audited. 14,200 names. It was a number designed to be impressive on a benefits brochure, not a number you could call. The second machine is the one that actually empties the network out, and it is the cleverest and the coldest. It is the reimbursement rate. When a therapist sees a patient under a plan, the plan pays them a set amount per session. I pulled our schedules and I compared them. For comparable work, comparable time, comparable training, the plan paid behavioral health providers about 38% below what it paid the medical surgical side. 38%. Think about what that does. A therapist cannot pay rent on a rate that is more than a third below what the work is worth. So they stop taking the plan. They go out of network, or cash only, or they leave the area. And every time one leaves, the reachable network gets smaller, but the name stays on the directory because nobody is checking. The low rate is a slow drain that empties the network from the inside, while the brochure keeps saying 14,000. It is a self-fulfilling collapse. You pay too little, the providers leave, the network becomes a ghost, and the only thing that stays full is the list. The third machine is the gate. For the most serious care, residential treatment for addiction, intensive outpatient programs for a kid in real danger, the plan made you fail first. You had to try and fail at a lower level of care before they would approve the higher one. You had to clear prior authorizations and concurrent reviews that the medical side did not face for comparable severity. A family with a child sliding toward the edge would be told, in effect, "Let the child get worse first, then we will talk about the bed." There was no comparable hoop on the medical surgical side for conditions of comparable seriousness. That is the parity violation stated in its plainest form. And the document that was supposed to catch all three. The comparative analysis the law required, the show your work proof that these rules were applied no more harshly to mental health than to medicine. I pulled it. It was 4 pages. 4 pages of boilerplate, generic language that could have described any plan in the country, with no real comparison, no data, no honest reckoning with the rates, or the directory, or the gates. It was a form letter wearing the costume of an analysis. It had been certified to the Department of Labor as if it were the real thing. The signature on the network adequacy attestations, the man who put his name to the claim that the network was sound, was an executive at Anthelion named Curtis Mbeki Lindquist, the head of their network operations and adequacy reporting. Then I pulled the claims. The thing that turned the design into a body count. From 2021 through 2025, across the plan, roughly 41,000 behavioral health claims had been denied or abandoned. 41,000. Some denied outright, many more simply abandoned, which is the quiet number, the one that does not look like a denial in the data. A parent calls the list, reaches air, gives up, and pays out of pocket or simply does without. The plan records nothing. The claim that was never filed is the cleanest denial there is, because it leaves no fingerprint. 41,000 times, over 5 years, the machine had turned a person away from care they had been promised and called it network adequacy. I want to make those 41,000 into people for a moment, because a number that big goes numb in the mouth, and the whole point of the parity law is that each one of them was a person. I will keep these stripped of anything that could identify a real member, the way I was trained to, but I built case vignettes out of the data, dozens of them, and I will give you 3 so you can feel the shape of the rest. There was a woman in her 50s, a long-haul scheduling clerk at one of the depots, who had been stable on a particular kind of therapy for an anxiety disorder for years. Her therapist left the network when the rate dropped. She called 8 of the names the directory offered as replacements. 3 were not taking patients. 2 had moved, 1 was the wrong specialty, 2 never called back. She did not file a claim because there was no visit to bill. She just stopped going. In the data, she is not a denial. She is an absence. Her last claim simply ends, mid-year, and nothing follows it. Multiply that absence by thousands, and you have most of the 41,000, the quiet ones, the people who were not refused so much as exhausted. There was a young man, early 20s, a dependent on a parent's coverage, who needed a residential program for an addiction that was going to kill him on the trajectory he was on. The plan made him fail first. Try outpatient. Fail. Try a lower level of care. Fail. Each failure was a month, and each month was a month closer to the thing everyone was afraid of, and the medical side of the very same plan would have approved an equivalent level of inpatient care for an equivalent severity of a physical illness without making the patient deteriorate on purpose to qualify. He got the bed eventually, after the gait had taken its toll. The gait is not a paperwork delay when the disease is moving. The gait is a part of the disease the plan added on its own. And there was a couple trying to get their 9-year-old assessed for something the school kept flagging, who called 14 pediatric behavioral providers off the list and reached, in total, one who would even put them on a waiting list, an 11-month waiting list for a 9-year-old in a window of childhood that does not wait 11 months for anybody. They paid cash, out of network, on a warehouse salary because the network they were promised was a brochure. No claim, no fingerprint. Another absence in the data. I had 30 of those, then 50. They were not anecdotes. They were the texture of the 41,000, and once I had read enough of them, I could not look at the directory as a directory anymore. I looked at it and saw a waiting room full of people the plan had quietly decided it could lose. I sat at that kitchen table with the 4-page form letter on one side and the 41,000 on the other, and I understood that I was not looking at a paperwork problem. I was looking at the thing I had spent 9 years on a corded phone fighting, except now it was industrialized, certified, and signed, and it had my compliance function standing next to it like a hostess at the door. The numbers were the case, but a number is not a person, and I am a social worker before I am anything else, so I have to tell you about the person. I will tell it carefully because he is alive, and his recovery is his, not a thing for me to put on display. His name is Mateo Aldridge Brennan. In the autumn of 2024, he was 16 years old. His father, Dale, is a warehouse supervisor at one of Meridian Crestline's distribution centers, a plan member, one of the 90,000. Dale is a big, quiet, capable man, the kind who fixes things and does not complain. And in the autumn of 2024, he was trying to find his son a psychiatrist, and he could not. Mateo had been struggling for months. The school had flagged it. The family doctor had flagged it. Everyone agreed the boy needed a child and adolescent psychiatrist, the specialty, not a general counselor, and he needed one soon. Dale had the plan. Dale had the directory, and Dale spent 10 weeks doing exactly what I had done in Cleveland at 25, and exactly what I had done at my kitchen table that summer. He called the list. He reached air. Retired, not taking new patients. Moved, no answer. 10 weeks of a father calling a phone book of people who would not pick up while his son got worse in the next room. In January of 2025, Mateo tried to take his own life. He was hospitalized in an emergency, and he survived, and I will leave the worst of it there, because he survived, and that is what matters, and the details are not mine to hand out. He survived. Hold on to that. I learned about Mateo because of where I sat. A case like that throws off paperwork, appeals, emergency authorizations, and some of it crossed my desk in the wreckage. I went to Dale. Carefully, properly, with consent, with the privacy law respected at every step, because I was not going to add a violation to the pile while I was trying to prove one. I asked Dale if he would let me document what had happened to him, the 10 weeks, the calls, the directory, the doors that were painted on the wall. He sat at his own kitchen table, with a stack of denial and non-response letters in front of him, and his son's bedroom door down the hall, and he said yes. He said, if it stops it happening to somebody else's kid, write down every call I made. So Mateo's timeline went into the file, with permission, in the proper way. 10 weeks, every door. And it stopped being an abstraction. The 41,000 had a face now, a 16-year-old who was alive by a margin no family should have to live through, because his father had been handed a list and told it was a network. I took the audit and the dataset and the rate schedules and the 4-page form letter, and I escalated. Up the chain, to the Vice President of Total Rewards and Benefits Strategy, a man named Bram Holloway Vandercott Rees, and to the Chief Human Resources Officer, Delphine Saradarian Whitlock. I laid it out for them the way I have laid it out for you. The directory, the rates, the gates, the 71%, the 6%, the boilerplate analysis, the 41,000, the boy. The Vice President listened. He is a serious man, not a cartoon, and I want to be fair to him because the fairness is what makes it frightening. He did not deny the numbers. He did something worse. He absorbed them and made them disappear into a sentence. He said, "The plan meets contractual adequacy on the metrics our administrator reports." He believed it. That was his whole defense and his whole worldview in one breath. Adequacy is what the directory says, not what your phone says. We pay Anthelion to tell us the network is sound. Anthelion tells us the network is sound. Therefore, the network is sound. My secret shopper audit, 300 real calls logged in my own hand, he called anecdotal methodology. The 41,000 he treated as Anthelion's data problem, not the plan's broken promise. He was sincere. That is the part that kept me up at night. He was not lying to me. He had simply decided that the list was the truth and the phone was an opinion. On Thursday, the 5th of December, 2024, between 10 past 2 and 21 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, they took my job away by giving me a better sounding one. It lasted 11 minutes. I have thought about those 11 minutes more than I would like to admit. It happened in a 6th-floor HR conference room at the Meridian Crestline headquarters in Columbus. Delphine Saradarian Whitlock, the Chief Human Resources Officer, delivered it. Delphine is Armenian-American, 54, and she is not a villain in this story. I need you to understand that early, because what she did hurt me, and she did it in good faith, and both of those things are true at once. She told me I was being moved. Out of Director of Behavioral Health Benefits and Parity Compliance, the job with sign-off authority over the Parity attestations, oversight of the administrator, and access to the claims warehouse, into a newly created role, Director of Member Wellness Engagement. It sounded like a promotion if you did not listen closely. It sounded caring. And it had no Parity Compliance Authority, no oversight of Anthelion, no access to the claims data, and a mandate to run lunch and learn wellness webinars about sleep hygiene and gratitude journaling. They took the woman who had counted the dead therapists and put her in charge of telling people to drink more water. The Vice President stopped by at 18 minutes past 2. He framed it warmly because he believed it warmly. He said, "Renata, your passion for members is exactly what this new seat is for. The Parity data side just needs a less adversarial cadence with Anthelion." A less adversarial cadence. That is how he described the act of removing the only person in the building who had actually called the network. They needed someone less adversarial with the vendor whose product was a ghost. And then Delphine, after he left, at 21 minutes past 2, said the thing that I have kept. She said it privately, quietly, sincerely. She said, "Renata, I fought to keep you here. The conversation upstairs was about whether to keep you at all. This keeps you." And she meant it. She believed she had caught me as I fell. She thought the wellness seat was a soft landing and that the alternative was no landing at all, and she had spent whatever capital she had to get me the soft one. I looked at her, and I made a decision in that moment that I have never regretted. I did not lie to her, and I did not turn on her. I said, "Delphine, I believe you. Thank you for telling me the truth." Because she had told me the truth as she understood it, and in a building that ran on a comfortable fiction, a person who tells you the truth even while she delivers your demotion is not your enemy. She is the only honest instrument in the room. I was not going to break the one honest instrument I had. I cleaned out my office that afternoon. The claims warehouse access was revoked by the end of the week, but the directory was already printed and crossed out in red on my kitchen table at home, and the steno pad was already full, and the recordings were already saved, and the rate schedules were already copied through proper channels while I still had the right to them. They had taken my seat. They had not taken the summer. Here is where I am supposed to tell you that I sat on it, that I bided my time, kept my head down in the wellness seat, built my archive for years, and waited for the perfect moment to detonate. That is the story people expect, because it is the story they have heard. It is not what I did, and the reason it is not what I did is the whole moral spine of this thing, so let me be very clear about it. I did not wait. People were being denied care right then. Every week I sat quietly in that wellness seat was a week another parent dialed a dead doctor. Mateo had already happened. Waiting was not patience. Waiting was complicity with a nicer face on it. From December into the spring, I served my sentence in the member wellness engagement role. It was a windowless kind of existence, a ring light and a webinar schedule, a title that sounded like care and meant silence. The parity issue had been reframed, in the way these things get reframed, as Renata's crusade. My secret shopper audit, 300 calls logged by hand, was dismissed in a meeting as anecdotal methodology. I was introduced once, at a benefits team meeting, as our member experience conscience, to polite laughter, and I sat there and let them laugh, because I already knew what I was going to do, and laughing people do not watch you closely. What I was doing after the webinars was building the complaint. I found outside counsel, a firm that knew benefits law, and I learned how to do this properly. And early in that process, I learned the thing that some people find the hardest part of the whole story to believe. There is no reward in this. The big fraud laws you have heard of, the ones where a whistleblower brings a case and gets a percentage of what the government recovers, those exist for other kinds of fraud. They do not exist here. The parity law and the benefits law I was operating under have no such provision. There is no relator share. There is no percentage. If I filed, and if I won, and if the government recovered tens of millions of dollars, my cut was zero, by statute, with certainty. I asked counsel directly, more than once, because I wanted to be sure I understood. There is no scenario, I asked, in which I am paid for this. None, they said. None. I want you to sit with that, because it removes the thing people reach for when they want to make a whistleblower comfortable to dismiss. There was no payday. There was no windfall to decline nobly or donate generously. There was just the work, and the certainty that the work would cost me money and a career and pay me nothing, and the fact that people were being denied care while I decided. I filed anyway. I did not file for a reward because there was no reward to file for. I filed because the phone was still ringing out and somebody had to write down every number. In March of 2025, I filed a complaint with the Department of Labor, the Employee Benefits Security Administration, and a parallel complaint with the State Department of Insurance for a market conduct review. I filed it while I was still employed, while I still sat in the wellness seat and ran the webinars and got introduced as the conscience to polite laughter, while members were still, that very month, calling the directory and reaching air. The company thought the problem named Renata had been solved in December. They thought the reorganization had worked. The machine kept denying claims, comfortable, certain, adequate on the metrics the administrator reported. And the woman they had reorganized into silence had just handed the federal government 300 recorded calls, a 41,000 claim dataset, a 38% rate differential, a 4-page form letter, and a boy's timeline. I had kept the proof on the kitchen table the whole time. Not in a safe, not for 10 years. On the table, in plain sight, while it was still happening, because waiting was the one thing I could not afford to do. The Department of Labor opened it. The State Department of Insurance opened its own parallel track, a market conduct examination. And I went back to running wellness webinars because I could not say a word. That is the strange, suspended part of the story that I did not expect and that I want to be honest about. When you file with the government, you do not get to stand up and announce it. The investigation needed to be quiet to be effective. So I sat in the wellness seat through the spring and into the summer of 2025, smiling through webinars about resilience, while behind a wall I could not see, federal investigators were doing the validation that the plan had refused to do for 3 years. I provided everything, The 9-part file went over in full. The 300-call secret shopper audit, with the recordings and the stenopad tallies and the red-penned 47-page directory. The 41,000 claim denial dataset. The 4-page boilerplate set beside what the statute actually required. The 38% reimbursement differential. My internal escalation trail, every memo, every acknowledged email with timestamps. The December reorganization notice, the silencing document, dated and signed. The Anthelion attestation packet that Mbeki Lindqvist had put his name to. Mateo's timeline, with Dale's consent. And the dated log I had kept the whole time? The real-time ledger, where I wrote a line every time I learned the machine had turned away another one. Not a landmark every few years, a line every few weeks. They denied another one. They denied another one. They denied another one. The hardest thing in that period was a person, not the silence. It was Delphine. As the investigation moved, the real secret shopper numbers reached her. The 71%, the 12 dead providers, the things she had not known when she delivered my reorganization in good faith back in December. She had believed the wellness seat was a soft landing. Now she understood what it had actually been, a way to take the building's eyes and ears off the network and call it protecting Renata. And she did not flinch from it. She gave the Department of Labor a sworn declaration, later a deposition. The woman who had delivered my demotion crossed the floor and stood with the investigation, on the record, under oath. She did it knowing it would cost her standing in the building. She did it because, as she had been in December, she was the one honest instrument in the room, and when she finally saw the whole picture, the instrument told the truth. I kept the wellness webinars going. I talked to 90,000 people about gratitude and sleep, while the case I had built moved silently underneath the floor they were standing on. It is a strange way to spend half a year. I do not recommend it. But it was the price of doing it the right way, through a real complaint and a slow, careful government, instead of a leak to a reporter or a scene in a meeting. You do it correctly, and correct is quiet, and quiet is lonely, and you run the webinars and you wait, and the waiting this time is the right kind of waiting, because the file is already in the government's hands, and the only thing left to wait for is the truth to be confirmed by someone with the power to fix it. The government did, in a matter of months, the thing the plan had refused to do in 3 years. It checked the list. The Department of Labor and the state insurance regulators ran their own validation of the behavioral network. They tested reachability. They compared the behavioral reimbursement rates against the medical surgical benchmark and found the differential exactly where I had found it. They examined the prior authorization rules and the fail-first gates and found no comparable hurdle on the medical side. They read the 4-page comparative analysis and saw it for what it was, a form letter, not an analysis. And they reached the same finding my kitchen table summer had reached, except now it carried the weight of the federal government behind it. The reachable network was a fraction of the advertised one. 71% of it was a ghost, and a network that is 71% ghost is not an adequate network applied fairly against medical surgical care. It is a parity violation, stacked 3 deep, certified to the Department of Labor on a 4-page lie. The investigation followed the machine back to its maker. The directory that was not validated, the reimbursement schedule set 38% low, the boilerplate analysis certified across dozens of self-insured clients, all of it traced to Anthelion health administrators, the administrator, the actual engine. This was the thing I had understood early and that the vice president never would. The villain here was not a person. It was a design. Anthelion had built a machine that manufactured ghost networks at scale and sold them to employer after employer as adequacy, and the 4-page form letter was the same 4-page form letter on plan after plan, because that was the product. A real network was expensive. A network that looked real on a brochure and emptied itself out through a 38% rate was cheap. And the difference between the two was money, and the money was the point, and the people calling the dead phone numbers were the cost, written off, abandoned, uncounted. There was a human signature on it, and that mattered, and the consequence found him. Curtis Mbeki Lindqvist, The Anthelian executive who had signed the network adequacy attestations, knowing the directory was stale, the man who certified that the ghost was sound, faced individual accountability. A referral, a state sanction on his market conduct, the loss of his professional standing. He resigned under the monitorship. He did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that, because some people will want a prison, and there is none in this kind of case. The law that governs this does not send people to a cell. It claws back the money, it forces the rebuild, it strips the credential, it puts a federal monitor in the building for years. It does not lock the door. The man who signed the lie lost his career and his name in the industry, and he kept his freedom. And that is the shape of justice this particular law can deliver. It is not the shape from a movie. It is the shape that gets 41,000 claims reprocessed, which is the shape I cared about. And there was one more meeting, near the end, a final compliance session before the resolution closed, where the vice president was across the table from me. He still believed what he believed. He talked about contractual adequacy and the metrics the administrator reported, the same liturgy, even then, even with the federal finding on the table. And I said the sentence to him that I had been saying since I was 25. I said it flat, across the table, in front of the people who needed to hear it. I said, "A network you cannot reach is not a network, Bram. It is a list." He did not have an answer. For once, the list was not the truth, and the phone was not an opinion, and there was nothing in his liturgy that covered the silence after I said it. In the late part of 2025, Mateo Aldridge Brennan went back to school. He was 17 by then. He was stable. He was seeing a real outpatient therapist, a reachable one, a door that opened under the network the government was forcing the plan to rebuild. I am not going to dramatize his recovery, because it is his, and because recovery is not a single triumphant moment. It is a long, quiet grind of appointments and bad days and slightly less bad days. But he was alive, and he was in a chair across from a clinician who picked up the phone, and that is the entire reason any of the rest of it was worth doing. His father Dale came to find me. We had stayed in careful contact through the case, within the bounds I was allowed. He shook my hand, the big, quiet, capable man who fixes things, and he said a thing I have not been able to put down since. He said, "You called 300 therapists. The one we needed was on that list the whole time, and nobody could reach him. Now somebody can." The one we needed was on the list the whole time, and nobody could reach him. That is the ghost network in one sentence from the one person who paid the most for it. The door was always there, painted on the wall, with a name on it. The cruelty was never that the care did not exist. The cruelty was that the care existed and the path to it had been allowed to rot, on purpose, to save 38%, and a 16-year-old nearly died of the gap between the name on the door and the door. I think about the math of it differently now. 14,200 names. The directory was never empty. It was full of real people who could have helped, and the machine had simply stopped maintaining the road to any of them because the road cost money and the list was free. You do not have to make the providers disappear to make the care disappear. You only have to stop answering for them. A list is cheap. A network is expensive. And somebody had decided, in a schedule of reimbursement rates and an unvalidated directory and a 4-page form letter, that the children could have the cheap thing and call it the expensive thing. It ended the way the cold open began. The Department of Labor announced it. $33,600,000 in the aggregate. A resolution under the Parity law and the federal benefits law. The largest part of it was the thing that actually helps people. The reprocessing of roughly 41,000 denied and abandoned behavioral health claims from 2021 through 2025, and restoration payments to the members the machine had turned away. A civil penalty on the recovered amount, about $8,400,000. A parallel settlement with the state insurance regulator on the market conduct findings, and the part that changes the future instead of paying for the past. A mandatory rebuild of the behavioral network, a real one, with the providers actually validated. A correction of the reimbursement rates up to the medical surgical benchmark so the network would stop emptying itself out. A substantive comparative analysis, a real one this time, not 4 pages of boilerplate. And a 3-year federal monitorship over all of it to make sure the rebuild was real and stayed real. Anthelian Health administrators signed the largest share and accepted corrective action across its self-insured book because the 4-page form letter was on plan after plan and the machine had to be corrected everywhere, not just here. But Anthelian, the company, persists. It signed, it corrected, it submitted to the monitor, and it is still in business, still administering plans, because that is what happens to a machine. You do not jail a machine. You put a monitor inside it, and you make it run clean for 3 years, and you hope the habit holds. Bram Holloway Vanderkot Rees, the vice president, was named as a plan fiduciary co-defendant. The plan sponsor accepted the fiduciary corrective action, and he kept his job. He held his title through the monitorship, and he never publicly apologized to anyone, because in his mind, there was nothing to apologize for. The plan had met contractual adequacy on the metrics the administrator reported, right up until the federal government proved the metrics were a ghost, and even then, I am not sure he believed it in the place where a person actually believes things. The man who set the tone kept his seat. The man who signed the attestations, Mbeki Lindqvist, lost his career and kept his freedom. The machine kept running, corrected. That asymmetry is real, and I am not going to paper over it with a tidy ending, because tidy endings are how the next ghost network gets built. The broader crisis is bigger than one plan. There are other directories, right now, full of people who will not pick up. I got nothing. I want to say it one more time, plainly, because it is the truest fact in the story. There is no reward in this law for the person who reports it. I did not decline a windfall or donate a share because there was no windfall and no share to begin with. I spent my own evenings and my own credibility and a good chunk of my career, and the statute paid me exactly 0, with certainty, and I knew it would before I filed. What I got was not money. What I got was that the network got rebuilt, and the members can reach care now, and that after the resolution closed, they put me back in a real job, Director of Parity Compliance, with the authority restored because someone had to stay and police the monitorship and make sure the rebuild was not just another form letter. I took it. Lateral, restored, no raise that mattered. I took it because I wanted to be the one in the building when the monitor came to check the list, to make sure that this time, when somebody called it, it would answer. Now let me tell you about 2 rooms. The first is a multi-purpose room in a community center in suburban Columbus, a Saturday afternoon, about a year after the resolution. Folding chairs. A free workshop I run, unpaid, called How to Actually Reach Your Behavioral Health Benefits. Plan members and families, the people the law is supposed to be for, sitting in the folding chairs learning the unglamorous skills. How to read the corrected directory. How to tell a real listing from a ghost. How to appeal a denial and where to send it, and what the deadlines are. The dull, boring, load-bearing knowledge that stands between a family and a painted door. Mateo Aldridge Brennan came, 17, stable, in school. He did not give a speech. He sat in the row of folding chairs, which is exactly where a 17-year-old should be on a Saturday, bored and fine and alive. His father Dale was beside him. Dale shook my hand again and did not say anything this time, because he had already said the only thing there was to say. I taught the room, and at the end, I said the sentence out loud, the one I have been saying my whole adult life, and this time I added the ending I had earned. I said, "A network you cannot reach is not a network. It is a list." We made it a network again. The second room is my own kitchen in Westerville, a weeknight, the same table where the red pen directory and the stenopad and the laptop sat through the whole investigation. The directory is gone now. In its place is dinner. 80 across from me, Theo with one earbud in, Julia mounting a case about something, and a guest. Delphine Sarodarian Whitlock, the woman who delivered my reorganization in December and then crossed the floor and gave the government her declaration under oath. She came to dinner. Not by letter, not by phone. To the table. She said, over the food, "I thought the wellness seat was a soft landing. I was wrong about what it was." And I said, "You told me the truth that day, Delphine. That is the only thing I ever needed you to do, and you did it." That is how a reconciliation actually happens. Not in a grand scene. At a kitchen table, over food, between two people who told each other the truth at the worst possible moment. 80, who is a teacher to the center of her bones, looked at Theo and Julia and said the thing I will let stand as the lesson because she says it better than I could. She said, she called 300 therapists from this table while she still had the job. Remember that this is what doing the right thing actually looks like. It is boring, and it is at the kitchen table, and you do it before anyone gives you permission. My father was on speakerphone from Lorraine, 77, while we ate. He had asked me weeks before how it ended, and I had told him the network was rebuilt, and the claims were being reprocessed, and the boy was back in school, and he had grunted in his terrible economical way. That night, on the speaker, with my family around the table, he said the only review of the whole affair I have ever wanted. He said, "Good, you fixed it. Now eat." No speech, no wisdom passed down a generation, no old saying in any language. Just a living father telling his daughter to eat her dinner because the work was done and the food was getting cold. The steno pad sits closed on the kitchen counter. Not buried, not framed, just closed, finished on the counter, the way you leave a tool when the job is over. I spent 9 years on a phone trying to find a bed for somebody's kid. Then, I spent 8 years inside the plan that was supposed to make those calls unnecessary, and I found out the plan was a list of people who would not pick up. I did not wait. People were being turned away while I had the proof in a steno pad on my kitchen table, so I filed it while I still worked there and while it was still happening. My name is Renata Osterveld Marchetti. I am a social worker who learned to read a plan document. A network you cannot reach is not a network. It is a list. We made it a network again. That is what I am for.